We are joined by John Norris, former California Fish and Wildlife Game Warden, star on Wild Justice that used to appear on National Geographic, conservationist, and author of Hidden War. So, John, we have been cross-pollinating. I was on yours and Wayne's podcast, and it's nice
Right.
that you can come on to mine and talk about kind of what's on your mind about different things.
So good to be on your show, Gabby, and it was so fun to have you on our show. And all the stuff we're doing for conservation, you're all the way in the hub of it politically, in the DC kind of hotbed, if you will, which is fantastic. Thanks for all you're doing. I'm up here in Montana. My co-host Wayne is in New Hampshire, and I come from the golden state of California, which is controversial on so many levels, but still has a very big wildlife resource conservation need that all those game wardens and all my brothers and sisters, my colleagues from the past, if you will, operationally, are still fighting the fight for wildlife from a conservation standpoint as much as we can sustain that. So great to be on your show. And, I know you've had a chance to look at Hidden War and all the different things we're doing on the conservation side as they affect not only my old home state of California, but really the country. So great to be here and look forward to talking about anything you want to dive into.
Absolutely. Why don't you start about what led you to become a game warden, and then we'll talk about the book as well. I think people will be really interested to hear about your findings.
Cool. The whole game warden history for me was pretty non-traditional. Like if you talk to Wayne Saunders, my co-host that you know well from our Warden's Watch and Thin Green Line podcast, like Wayne and like all the other guys and gals I came up with, in the Fish and Wildlife Academy, and I'm going to date myself because this was 1992 when I started the Fish and Game Academy at Napa Valley College in California. I had never met a game warden until college. I grew up hunting and fishing. My grandfather was career Navy, hardcore conservationist, settled up here in northwestern Montana to be in just a hardcore hunting and fishing and mountain state. My dad and his 8 siblings, kind of followed in that suit. They all hunted. They all were anglers. Ethical, legal conservation. I mean, that meat basically provided good protein for my entire family and all my relatives for every year. So I passed hunter safety like at 9 years old. I was hunting waterfowl with my dad at 9.5, 10 years old. But I never met a game warden all those years growing up and hunting in California, which is really weird, but it just never happened. And then when I was in college, I was actually an engineering major in an impacted program in San Jose State, because I like to be creative and work with hydro and waterways and stuff like that. And was going along in my first year of that college program and was on a backpacking trip with my best friend growing up and Baja Race teammate Jeff Moore and one pack horse in the middle of winter break over Christmas in Henrico State Park, way into the backcountry with nobody in the park. No one goes in the middle of winter. We were just a bunch of dumb college kids getting soaking wet, that type of thing, but having a great time. And who comes upon us but a game warden? Thinking we were deer poachers in Henrico State Park because they had monster blacktail mule deer in that park. And, there was a lot of poaching in that park, obviously, for guys trying to get illegal trophies out of season. When this guy realized we were just a couple of college kids out there trying to adventure and backpack and disconnect from finals in college, he realized we were no harm. But I kept him there for 2 hours, bending his ear like, what do? You come in a green truck, you're in a 4-wheel drive, you come creeping down on us. We're 13 miles into the backcountry from another living being, and you're just on your own, no backup, and you are basically out here being kind of the cowboy wildlife ranger. What is this job? And so I was completely overwhelmed. I mean, the light bulb went off, the switch kind of flipped inside me. Jeff realized, we got a problem. What's going on? I go, I'm doing the wrong job. I'm in the wrong program in college. That's exactly what I need to be doing. And so I changed my major immediately on winter break, went into criminal justice. And then it was all, vapor trail behind me at that point. And then I got hired in 1992 to join the academy, one of the 4 civilian guys coming in, and started a great career in Southern California, and then eventually back in my hometown area of Silicon Valley for pretty much the duration.
Yeah, and during your tenure, and I'll bring up the book for everyone watching, you were able to be a part of one of the first METs, which I believe is the marijuana enforcement team.
Yep.
And in your book, so far, I've been enjoying it and I will complete it very soon, but I understand the gist of it and I wanted to read it to ask you more about it, of course. But it's a very fascinating book. And like you, I'm also a California native. And I often thought the cartels, what you describe about in the book and just other drug ringers, I thought it was just the cartels at the border. And I didn't know the extent through your findings and through the MET that all these different cartels or drug sellers and other bad actors would go to public lands and defile pristine trout streams, other natural elements to partake in their crimes, to especially engage in the marijuana trade and other illicit drug trade. And it's just fascinating. And I think, obviously, and I remember you caught the attention of Joe Rogan, the famous podcaster and host, and you were on his show
Right.
last year to talk about this. And your book has gotten a lot of notice. So speak to that, speak to kind of that. And I know some people are like, well, marijuana, like, does it relate to like decriminalization or not decriminalization of it? And I think it's separate from the issue of whether you want to decriminalize it or not. I think that's what some people listening might want to know, but it's just kind of separate from that kind of political debate, but it's more so the illicit drug trade. But talk about that program, how it's been piloted, have other states adopted it, and kind of your findings from the book as it relates to that.
Yeah, and you just hit it on the head, Gabby, when you said, does this lead to decriminalization? Because people think marijuana, it's legal in 11 states, give or take, with medicinal use, some recreational use, like we just did in California through Prop 64 and other medicinal laws. This story and what Hidden War goes into, people see the marijuana leaf on the front of the book cover and immediately they think it's an anti-cannabis book. And something we need, as you know, when you dive into the book, it's not that at all. I mean, in California, we're a pro-regulated state. And as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife now is tasked with being one of the main premier environmental compliance regulators of the legitimate cannabis industry. And that's been an overwhelming challenge for game wardens in California, to where over a quarter, if not more, of our force, we have about 80 officers out of 400, give or take, because I might be a little off on the numbers, dedicated to just cannabis enforcement. Not only the tactical unit, the marijuana enforcement team that I co-founded and supervised, but other watershed regulation, marijuana permitting teams. All of that has to be taken with a grain of salt when you look at the fight we are fighting, everybody is against. So if you're looking at pro-regulation, doing it right, you're not destroying the environment, you're not stealing water you shouldn't take, you're not using EPA-banned toxics or pesticides to grow and process cannabis for the recreational or the medicinal market, whether it's legal in your state or not. Nobody wants a poison product for cannabis users. And what we're finding, and what I was really lucky, and as you saw in the book, I mean, we've even been termed by the legitimate cannabis industry and the growers in like the Emerald Triangle that everybody knows worldwide as being some of the premier cannabis producers in California, of calling the Met team the Earth Warriors. That was an unorthodox name, from some growers that kind of coined that when they got to know what our team was doing, but I'll take it. I think it's complementary to showing that legitimate cannabis is unified with anti-cannabis, sentiments, regardless of where you sit throughout the nation. But the bottom line is, nobody wants to see these drug cartels out of Mexico destroying our environment, polluting trout wildlife streams, drinking water, killing lots of wildlife in their grow sites. And even worse yet, from a public safety standpoint, the reason we built the dedicated team to fight these guys head on and not focus on anything else in California for the Met was because the EPA banned poisons that these cartel growers have to import and smuggle illegally from Mexico, because they're not available in the US. They were banned by the EPA over 20 years ago because they are so toxic and so deadly. Insecticide, rodenticides that have nerve agents in them that were used, some of the same chemicals the Nazis used for their bioweapons in World War II. This stuff is nasty. And this stuff is put on the cannabis to keep animals and everything else off of it, but they don't wash it off. These growers aren't, public safety conscious, definitely for health and human safety. So this stuff stays on the product and goes into the black market where you're at in the DC corridor, the Chicago, New York, the Eastern Seaboard, the Midwest, all over the West Coast, because it's very potent cannabis. It's very cheap to get. So with a thriving black market of cannabis right now nationwide, even in California where we've regulated, we have not helped through our regulation process as it's drafted and scripted. We have not stopped the black market. We've actually enhanced it. And other states that are starting to regulate through traditional methods, in the Midwest especially, are having the same problem. They are seeing cartels going on wildlife refuges, public lands, like we talk about in the book, and then also private lands. Like, from being from California, there's a whole lot of private, pristine wildlife country that are cattle ranches, or they're deer hunting clubs, or they're a bass fishery. And they aren't open to the public, but they have a thriving wildlife resource that benefits everything around it. The cartels in California are going into those areas just as much as they are public lands as well. So being able to develop this team and be part of that toward the end of my career was definitely, I think, the highlight, because I can honestly say I've never felt like we made a bigger environmental protection dent than when we attacked this particular issue. And because these guys are so dangerous, they're heavily armed sometimes. We know the history of violence that the drug cartels, propagate all over Mexico. It's all over Instagram that you and I follow. It's all over Fox News. It's all over CNN News. I mean, it's just, this is something both sides of the political spectrum agree is not a good thing. I mean, there's a level of, real evil stuff going on here because of the anti-sentiment against people and wildlife. And these guys are violent. I mean, we've been involved in 6 gunfights with cartel gunmen. The first one in 2005, which I referenced in Hidden War, as you know, but really go in depth in my first book, In the Woods, chapter 2, was when we were ambushed above the Silicon Valley, above the affluent city of Los Gatos, literally in eyesight of eBay, Google, Facebook headquarters. And we're getting in a gunfight, and my partner, Warden, is shot through both legs with an AK-47 and almost dies from bleeding out. And by the good graces, he survived that. But
Yeah.
we knew at that point, Gab, that we were ill-equipped to deal with this problem as game wardens. The sheriff's office didn't have enough personnel. We were kind of ad hoc as we were doing it. And it eventually led to the Met being formed and game wardens taking it on as a priority. And now we're doing a more effective job, and none of us have been hurt, thank God, with what we've experienced. But the violence continues daily. I'm in touch with the team leader that replaced me and the guys on the team. And through COVID, I know you and I and Wayne talked about the changes as COVID affects wildlife resources regulation, anglers and hunters all over the country. Same problem. The cartels have gone unchecked through COVID largely because of the safety protocol we have in contacting them and not arresting them and not going hands on because of the exposure these guys could have, because they've been all over the country and they've been in Mexico. We don't know. So the cartels have seen that as an opportunity, and all of 2020 has been absolutely off the hook for black market cannabis production with these poisons put on it, methamphetamine production, fentanyl. We're also learning now from high-level sources and allies in the Drug Enforcement Administration that prescription narcotic drugs that look like a pharmaceutical that you would get prescribed for are being made in these dirty labs where the doses are so inconsistent, where one pill could be like a prescription painkiller, and a young adult ingesting this on the black market might be fine. And then they could take the very next pill in the bottle and die within minutes because the dose is 5 times what it should be. That's another thing the cartels are jumping into. The human trafficking issue that's so hot right now politically as we go into the election next week. Much of the human trafficking is being run by these same cartels that grow tainted weed, that produce methamphetamine, that run guns, that traffic in humans and kids. It's all one commercial enterprise that are capitalizing off different levels, different times of the year. So when we attack it from an environmental standpoint, we're really attacking a bigger issue that affects the whole country, regardless of where you sit on the cannabis issue.
Yeah, it's very full-fledged, and I'm going to encourage people to check out the book. I'll include in the show notes where people can buy the book, because it is a really fascinating, not too difficult of a read book. You could read it within a few days' time if you're busy, but if you dive into it, you'll be able to obviously extrapolate a lot of very fascinating stuff, and I'm looking forward to completing it. But so far, what I've read about just your stories and your experience is just so scary, and you don't really see much of environmentalists taking a stand on this. They try to engage in, they more so engage in, superfluous causes that actually detracts from wildlife conservation and other important subjects. So I would hope that environmentalist organizations do work with groups like the Met embedded within the Wildlife Agency, but I haven't heard of any such outrage by them. They're very selective on what constitutes attention.
Yeah, and it really helps, and I really appreciate you taking some time to discuss it, because it just opens some door of awareness. I mean, before you started to dive into the book, even though you knew my background and we've had some great conversations and we're doing some great work together, even you didn't really know the depth of, oh my gosh, what is really going on with these cartels? Why is this an issue? It's just, knowledge is power. Since the first book 11 years ago, and all the TV we did with the Wild Justice TV show you mentioned, the Game Warden reality show, and Patriot Profiles documentaries, investigative news with CNN to Fox to NBC to everybody in between. 10 years later, when we launched Hidden War at the NRA Annual last April in Indianapolis, and Colonel Waldenworth was a big proponent of getting that book to that show to drop it, because we knew we'd have a lot of receptive viewers, if you will, and readers. But more importantly, we'd be over on the East Coast where I had not been with the first book. And Gabrielle, it was crazy. 11 years after the first book, and as much outreach as we done, almost every book I was signing for, anybody that came to the booth or stopped by the NRA spot would look at this and go, Lieutenant, I had no idea this was going on in our country today. I had no idea that marijuana was such an issue with this particular group. And I said, that's why we named it the Hidden War, sir or ma'am. Honestly, it's one of those things that gets kind of underrepresented because we have so many hot button issues, right? Especially now with COVID, with the election, with the left and the right, you know, the fringe elements fighting like crazy. So this is one that affects us all. I appreciate you putting it out there. It's one of many issues we got to deal with, but from a conservation standpoint that you and I both love, we love our wildlife species. It is just so disgusting and enraging to see what we see in these grow sites. And one thing, as you know from the book, is our publishing group Caribou was really cool to put a lot of color photos in the middle and pepper a lot of photos throughout this book. So you get a color section in the middle that graphically shows these poisons. It shows dead mountains lions that are protected in California. Red fox, some of the punji pits, some of the armed, you know, camouflage gunmen with AK-47s, the snare traps, our canines in action. It's mind-blowing to think that this element of battle is going on domestic soil, and especially Silicon Valley and everywhere in the Golden State and 25 other states. So appreciate people reading it. It is available on Audible. I was able to read for the Audible version, so there's a little passionate narration in there. If people don't like to, you know, don't have the time to read it, I mean, we're podcasting and we're listening. So, and if anyone has questions or comments, just hit me up on Instagram at John Norris and direct message me or email me, because I'm answering questions on this daily to this day. And we're educating our youth, right? We're talking to high schools. We're talking to young Americans that are going to use cannabis or not. And they just want to, you know, not be complicit in a criminal enterprise. And certainly they don't want to ingest a toxic poison that could kill them. And that's the first thing we want to see for any cannabis user, is not dealing with this stuff for their safety.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. And another thing you were extremely passionate about was obviously wildlife conservation. We've talked at length online and offline and previously on your podcast about big game species. And actually just before we recorded, the Department of Interior, I mean, they've been teasing this for a little bit, but they, in line with the Fish and Wildlife Service, announced that they will be going through with recommending the full delisting of the lower 48 gray wolf, which I know is a big predator in Montana, where you reside. And I've heard from people on the ground about the need for the species to be managed. And it hasn't just come about just recently. There's actually been an active management system in play for wolves since the early 2000s. People don't know that there is an active management system, and their determination is that the wolf has fully recovered. It doesn't warrant having threatened protections anymore because it's at healthy numbers. And a lot of people see this as a success for conservation. Many construe decimation with delisting efforts. They say that if you take the wolf off the list, it's going to become imperiled, it's going to be threatened and endangered once again, all the while dismissing the fact that states, local entities, tribes have a rightful place in concert with the federal government to more so manage or take this species into question. So what are your thoughts on this update and just kind of big game management, especially when it comes to grizzly as another species in Montana? Because Montana is very different from the East Coast, very different even from California. But this is an interesting update, and I think former game wardens like yourself and other wildlife enthusiasts would be pressed to know exactly what goes on into this thinking and why this species needs to be managed.
Yeah, it's a great topic. I was very happy to see this delisting statute come about, and I appreciate you sending it over to me to get the latest update. I know it's been brewing. This is one of those really passionate, emotional issues, especially for non-hunters when they think of the wolf. The wolf is a majestic, stoic predator. I love seeing them in the wild. You rarely do. I have nothing but respect for that magnificent animal, just like the mountain lion in California. But in order to keep the wolf population thriving and balanced with every other wildlife species out there, for the sake of everybody that does that loves wildlife, and I think everybody does, whether you hunt or not, whether you're a preservationist or conservationist, the wolf needs to be regulated, just like mountain lions need to be regulated, just like elk need to be regulated, just like deer need to be regulated, and upland birds and angling, right? So I'm glad to see this. I know from personal experience up here in Montana, where we have a thriving wolf population, especially up here in Northwest Montana, the Yak Wilderness, the Cabinet Mountains, all this area where we have the grizzly contingent going on. And up until recently, they were not huntable or managed, and they have been now for several years. And I can say since they have been managed, and since we do hunt them ethically and legally and balanced here in Montana, and deal with them on a depredation issue, because they are hammering, if overpopulated, they're taking out elk herds, they're taking out mule deer and white-tailed deer herds, and they're taking out domestic cattle on our cattle ranches up here in the high country, where because they were not managed, they could not be even minimally hunted. And now that they have been up here, are we really making a big dent as far as reducing the numbers of wolves? No, we're not. We're not in any way. But we are seeing our whitetail populations come back in certain areas. Personally, I can tell you right now, our whitetail and elk rifle season opener started Saturday, a few days ago, a week ago Saturday. I've been out almost every day around outreach business like I'm doing with you right now. And areas that I would never see a vital deer population going on are finally starting to come back because of this limited and very carefully regulated hunting opportunity and management opportunity in northern Montana. So it does help. It helps everything. And if you don't believe in it because you don't want to see a wolf be harvested, you certainly don't have to participate. But just from a logical standpoint of conservation management, and you look at the science, it really does need to happen for the benefit of the wolf, not just for the other species. If these things get overpopulated and start hammering too much domestic livestock and hitting too many other wildlife species, they're going to be depredated in mass numbers from an organization like Fish and Wildlife and Parks, rather than give hunters an opportunity that are out there more often. They're going to see them in a more natural environment. They can take them humanely and ethically. They can put money into the system. We can analyze those animals that are harvested. We can necropsy them. We can look at things for disease. We can look at diet. We can look at all these different things to find out what we need to do to better regulate these animals so that the wolf population always thrives and stays balanced. So I'm very excited to see it. All of us up here in Montana and all the other states that are on the conservation element are happy to see it as well, because these wolves are working their way down into states like Washington, Idaho. We've even had some up in the northeastern fringes of California when I was retiring, and we have a small population that's kind of moving around, and they've been named, and they're documented, and they're drifting state to state. And how is that population going to impact, a very dwindling black-tailed deer herd, or domestic livestock in urbanized areas like Northern California is starting to have? So basically, without beating the horse too much, this is a good thing for conservation. It's a thing that needs to be out there. And I'm glad to see it happening. And conservationists in management, especially with the agencies, including the game wardens I work with closely up here now in Montana, are encouraged to see it.
Yeah, and I think one implication that a lot of kind of non-endemic consumptive users don't understand, and I mean, personally, I don't think I could ever harvest a wolf myself, but I believe in the management of it. Coyote management is something I would look into. I have a friend in West Virginia who's like, I want help to manage coyotes. Would you help me? And I'm like, sure, I'll come. That would be great to do that. But it's, personally, I wouldn't do that, early in my hunting career. I don't think I would do it in any case, not because like I'm afraid to, but I just don't see a personal need to do it. I don't think I would eat it. The pelt would be kind of cool to harvest and procure, but I think also what people miss out in their examination of this, and why a lot of scientists and biologists advocate for this, even if they don't necessarily support doing it themselves. I think it's also to thin out aggressive members of different herds. We see this with grizzly bears, because I have never heard of so much bear mortality for grizzly bears. I keep tabs on what's going on because I have clients in Montana and other friends that live there. And the bear mortality rate of Fish and Wildlife game wardens having to kill those bears because they're being aggressive, they're attacking livestock, they're attacking black bears, they're attacking fellow grizzly bears. The bear mortality has been higher than what that proposed grizzly bear hunt was supposed to be. I think it was 2 females were expected, and then the hunt would be canceled, or like up to 23, which seems very impossible to do, because to harvest 23 grizzly bears, they're very elusive. They're not going to be readily huntable. They're pretty tricky and smart. But I think if they would have gone with the hunt that was legally shut down, we would have had fewer bear mortalities. We'd have these problem bears taken out of the equation, and other bears subsisting and being fine. So I think people forget that you'll see more mortality of the species in question if there's not a carefully managed, highly regulated hunt to do so.
Yeah, that is really well said. That is really well said on the grizzly issue, because again, I mean, we're talking about wolves, but I'm in the hotbed of inland grizzly issues as well. And having Glacier Park so close to where I'm at here, and the Flathead Valley, and having grizzlies in the Yak and in the Cabinet Mountains, and a lot of our problem grizzly bears that are threatening people in the national park, or they're getting into, they're threatening livestock, they're getting too close to people on that borderline threat issue, they are getting moved. If they're not dispatched, they're getting moved right into the cabinets, right into the Yak. And what are hunters doing, and people enjoying the outdoors in these remote, pristine areas near the Canadian border? They're running into problem grizzlies. And we're having grizzly attacks, and we're having people that are ill-equipped to deal with a grizzly attack because they just haven't had that exposure. And this bear is not scared of people. This bear has been in a national park. This bear is used to kind of running the show. So you're right. When you said you have specific bears that show a sign of aggression, or that are a standout problem bear, if you will, that's exactly how the species kind of works. I noticed it with the black bear population in California. Years of being a game warden in Cali, we dealt with some very aggressive black bears that we had to take out and dispatch for public safety, that were attacking Boy Scouts through their tents, on a park adventure, or an Eagle Scout mission, if you will, in the San Bernardino National Forest. I was actually seeing things like that early in my career. And was it every bear that aggressive? Absolutely not. It was really one small percentage animal out of a bunch, but one problem animal with that type of power and that type of aggressiveness can do a lot of damage to people and to livestock, as you know, or pets. So the grizzly, just like the wolf, needs to be managed, needs to be regulated. And I agree with you, they're very elusive. And anytime when I think of grizzly or brown bear hunting on inland Alaska, where I've been involved in those hunts, or a Fognac Island for the big Kodiak Island bears, and I look at those bear populations, and I look at how they're hunted, and I look at how successful the hunters are, and the money and the time and the management resource goes into doing one of those hunts, and all of those funds, and how well balanced those inland and those coastal island bears are regulated, it's just a win-win across the board for the bear population. They're less invasive to people. People are a lot safer because they're not running into as many grizzly encounters, and the bears are getting regulated just like the wolves are, to some level where hunters can take a very limited amount of them. The population's always in check through research every year. And honestly, I haven't seen herds other than, you're talking about our wolves and then our grizzly bears, more carefully regulated and more carefully studied right now, because they're so controversial to what the general public sees in those two magnificent animals. So, and I agree with you, hunting these animals isn't for everybody. And we're not saying that, if you're a hunter, go shoot a grizzly bear, go for that hunt, or go for a timber wolf hunt. I, like you, I'm a game warden. I've hunted all over the world as an active conservationist. But people ask me, or when are you going to do a mountain lion hunt in Montana? And I said, I may never do that mountain lion hunt in Montana. Like, how can you not do that? You're from California, where they were protected. You couldn't hunt them since 1992, and you dealt with mountain lion problems your whole career. And my response, Gabby, is, yeah, that's exactly why I don't know that I'll hunt a mountain lion in Montana, because I've had to dispatch 4 of them at work as a game warden that were in chicken coops, that were charging people on porches, that had, attacked a woman and her tribe of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts that were on trail runs, in Southern California, and part of having to depredate that animal that was now known to have killed a human in a state park. And I love and appreciate and respect the cat. The cat is just doing what the cat does. The cat is a very elusive, very stoic predator that happens to be in a highly populated state. And the cat didn't do anything wrong, and we didn't do anything wrong. We just clashed from 2 different worlds of how we both coexist. And that's the issue we're going to continue to run into as we continue to urbanize and expand and infringe upon our green open spaces. We're going to have more of these encounters, and management for these animals is going to be even more critical. So whether you believe in it or not, it is necessary. And you hit it on the head when you said that management is there. But it's, you're not going to want to hunt a wolf, and I'm not going to probably hunt a mountain lion, and that's okay, as long as they're getting regulated and they're out there and they're thriving in a balanced way.
Absolutely. We've covered so much ground here on the podcast today, John. Where can people follow your musings, connect with you, engage with you, and learn more about the book?
You bet. Really easy. Up on Instagram, I'm John Norris, JOHNNORES, no spaces. You can follow me same on Facebook. My email is trailblazer413@yahoo.com. You can always go to my website and find all this stuff and links and what we're doing with outreach and podcasts and TV developments and everything for the Conservation Thin Green Line and our podcast at johnnorris.com. And certainly direct message me on Instagram or email me anytime with questions or comments. And we're glad to help any way we can for the sake of the nation and all of us conservationists doing good things out there.